Bessarina. I'm Priya Lakhani, the CEO and founder of Century Tech, and I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting you this afternoon. We've got loads of content for the rest of the afternoon, so do download the Bett app. It's on your phones, download it. You will have the full schedule of all of the theatres. We've got 11 theatres at the Bett show for the next few days, and you'll have that on your handset. We're also encouraging you to tweet, so you've got a fantastic panel coming up. Tweet with the hashtag Bett2020. And if you want to use the free Wi-Fi, or love a bit of free Wi-Fi, it's on your phones. And if you look for free XL Wi-Fi, you'll be able to find it there. So I'm delighted to introduce the next panel. It's moderated by a very, very wonderful friend, an amazing man, Dr. Ger Grouse, Global Director of Education from Kinsania. He's going to be moderating a panel about building a creative approach to social mobility. On his panel, please give a warm welcome to Anthony Geffen, documentary filmmaker, pioneer in multi-platform storytelling, Russell Hobby, CEO of Teach First, Omari McQueen, a junior entrepreneur. He's so, look at him, he's amazing. Absolute and utter current star, major future star, and one of my most favourite publications, Bassi, editor of The Week Junior. Massive warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. How are we doing? Is everybody sitting down comfortably? Amazing. Amazing. Good afternoon. And welcome to Bett. And I can't possibly tell you how proud I am to be here and how happy I am to be back. From the Dutch coal miner's grandson to the city of Cool Britannia and the land of Brexit, which for our children has become perhaps less of hope and glory. I personally stand on the top of my hill, my social mobility hill, and I can see my coal miner grandfather over there, and I can see on that side my son who's just graduated from Oxford University, a state school boy, and social mobility personified. Whatever the question, education is always the answer, Archbishop Desmond Tutu told me, and I want to share with you today and with the panel some of the thinking around children, their inspirations, their aspirations, the educational confusion we find ourselves in globally, and what to do about it to help create a tomorrow that is slightly better than today, my definition of social mobility. I'm really proud to have these people here, Bassi, Anthony Geffen, Russell Hobby, and much more importantly than any of those three, Omari, and they'll be helping us with some questions later on.
I'm one of the few female pilots. I've been to America, Spain, and I love every minute of it. Air traffic control has cleared us for takeoff. Okay, let's go. People, property, and postcodes. I call it the 3 Ps. Hello, Mrs. Smith, how can I help you?
I have won lots of awards. When I was a school child, I was directing my school play. It's not a job, it's a calling.
A Romeo. They see surgery as an art form. It's vital to keep a cool head. Scalpel? I'm a bit of a petrol head. I could have been a doctor, but I prefer cars. What's not to love?
And we are live in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, and welcome to the 9 o'clock news.
Kinsania, London, a city made just for kids aged 4 to 14.
So if you just hang on to that video for a minute, and this is what it does, and I'll talk about the research in a little while, and that joined together then makes sense. The greatest challenge we face every day is to do the right thing for every child. And that's the lottery of inequality from birth that is so hard to apply fairness to, especially in education systems that appear obsessed with maintaining the status quo, mass approaches, and where there is little room for knowing the individual and what makes them tick. Let me tell you a brief story about Wythenshawe, a place of significant socioeconomic deprivation in the north of England next to Manchester Airport. And I was education director there in the early noughties. And I used to go into primary schools and ask the children about the jobs they could do at the airport. And the answers I got were the things they could see. baggage handler, passport control, etc. And incidentally, what you can see is only 35%. So already there's 65% you can't aspire to because you don't know it exists. And then I used to say to those kids, you can fly planes, you know. And the answer I used to get was, people from Wythenshawe don't fly planes. From 6-year-olds. The aspirational ceiling firmly in place, put there by us. And for Wythenshawe, you can read Amsterdam, New York, Shanghai, London, whatever. Children can only aspire to what they know exists, and it is our collective duty to twitch curtains, to open windows and doors, and to widen horizons. And when we do this, we find ourselves in a world where not every classroom has 4 walls, where the environment becomes a teacher and where experience is everything. And I ask myself sometimes, should we not collectively draw up a list of experiences and entitlements out with school, where we believe our children are entitled to by, say, 7, 14, 16, 11. Yeah, museums, libraries, galleries, parks, being part of a team, winning, losing, going to your capital city, finding out how government works or not. Should we not create learning cities and learning communities rather than have the division between schooling, I'll teach you, and education, the bit that sits outside there? If you have a strong purpose in life, you don't have to be pushed. Your passion will drive you there. And we live in a world for our children that is strangely contradictory. On the one hand, ever speedier global access to knowledge, news, events, and more, with an increasing need to be able to research, analyze, and judge. On the other hand, ever narrowing education curricula and testing at all ages, ever greater emphasis on overprotection in the name of health and safety. No wonder our children find themselves at times confused. How on earth will they acquire the skills to make informed decisions, to take calculated risks, and to learn from their mistakes? And I believe that without elements of calculated risk, self-confidence lands below where it might do. And surely we will be wondering in years to come why our supply of entrepreneurs, calculated risk takers by definition, has dried up. Educationally, we seem to believe our own hype and are turning our so-called success stories into fake news. We test and publish our findings in league tables and buy outstanding banners. We have come to believe that, to coin a phrase, weighing the pig makes it fatter. We have grown to value that which we can measure instead of measuring what we can value. And our education world strikes me increasingly as Kafkaesque. What is it we're trying to achieve? Let me tell you very briefly about a piece of research that with Kidzania we're doing globally. Over 500,000 children now, we've analyzed what their first choices are on their first visit to Kidzania across a number of countries. And in all cases, the stereotypes are set at the age of 4. So if you go into the aeroplane, pilot 95% boys, cabin crew 90% girls, from the age of 4. Secondly, that there's very little change between the ages of 4 and 14, and that begs questions about how we approach the STEM agenda. Thirdly, that globally, regardless of their background, almost all girls choose activities below their age range. 8-year-old girls choose 6-year-old activities. 8-year-old boys choose 9-year-old activities. There's a confidence issue there that we can only solve if we know our children better. But most importantly of all, children can only aspire to what they know exists. And if you come from a socioeconomically deprived area, the choices that you will make because of the limited number of experiences you've had will be much narrower. You are much more likely to choose to be a window cleaner, working in a supermarket, or being a courier than flying the aeroplane or being a TV producer. And then we wait in our schooling system until the age of 14, until we engage with our youngsters about what they might want to do with the rest of their lives. We allow 10 years of stereotype cementing before we begin to address it. Our education systems are based on the requirements of the past. Every economic age has its core asset, and in our time, surely, this is more about knowledge, skills, and individual character qualities. Every year, the world of work tells us that what is being produced doesn't meet the necessary requirement in terms of skills. It is time that the world of work got off the fence and became teachers with us. Every child is everybody's responsibility. We need to introduce into teaching and schooling early opportunities to be aware of the world around us and the futures it may hold. We need to incentivize that curiosity. Experience is everything, and for our children to connect with the purpose of schooling and education, we need to, of course, provide knowledge and understanding. But how and why? And how can we utilize environments that sit outside the classroom to make that happen? We become facilitators. We connect the dots with the children, and we apply the science. We turn the theory into practice by connecting schooling with experiences outside.
My first induction day at my training school, I was the only girl. We have a partnership with Kidzania. Myself and others in the airline do so much to try and make young children, young girls, anyone from different backgrounds realise that this isn't, a pipe dream, this is actually something that they can do. And it just makes them, have a vision of what they could potentially be.
That's the second video. And it was sponsored and paid for by the same company, except that the company had changed its attitude to working with much younger people in order to address the issue of their lack of female pilots. Change is possible as long as we work together. But in order to do that, we need to become our children's allies of empowerment. We need to make experience-based learning and partnership our modus operandus, purpose our watchword, high standards and a sense of achievement our aim, and our children's well-being and preparedness for tomorrow our promise. In the end, we are all teachers. I would like to end by quoting from OECD's 2030 strategy, The Future We Want. Competencies to shape the future. It is about acting rather than to be acted upon, shaping rather than to be shaped, and choosing rather than to accept the choices decided by others. That's my bit done. I'm now very happily going to go and sit down and talk to people who know much more about this. So thanks very much so far. Okay, brilliant. I'm going to start, Anthony, if I may, with you. And Anthony's business is amazing. I love going there. Atlantic Productions, the things they do in terms of technology is just mind-blowing. So the question about futures for me is this. If let's just imagine you're interviewing somebody in 10 years' time, a 16-year-old. What will you, in your line of work, what will you be looking for?
Okay, well, I think we're about to, in the next 2 years, have a very dramatic change in the way we communicate and the way we storytell. It's no secret that people like Apple have talked about only having a set number of smartphones in the future before they don't have smartphones and they have headgear. And I believe strongly, and I'm working with a number of people around the world on this, storytelling is going to become immersive. It's going to be something we can all have access to, either in a special dome setting or in a classroom. And I'll give you an example. I've been involved in a recent project where a Shakespearean production has been scanned. It can now be put on a table, and kids with a simple pair of glasses can actually immerse themselves in the production anywhere in the world. we've scanned the Great Pyramid, and we can now, through a phone or an iPad, allow children to gather and go into the Great Pyramid. We're going to see great changes. So the skill base we now need, the skill base of education, is going to open their eyes, because in part of this world is also an interactive world where we can use on headsets and things that can capture, using artificial intelligence, our reaction to things. So when I'm sitting there in 10 years' time or so, the world will have shifted. There'll be much more an ability for kids to have learned to tell their own stories, have interacted with stories, have learned where they're going. And I think that the sort of world we're going to be in is going to be very different. A lot of immersive experiences will be very unnatural to us. I have an experience, for example, with Attenborough narrates, where into a room comes animals from down the walls and around the floor, and he brings them to you. It's going to be a very different storytelling environment. So I'm going to look for kids who have come through that environment. We're already, thanks to NYU University, in NYU Abu Dhabi University, already have supported a program for students to start to learn about immersive storytelling. But I think what I'll look for is students who don't just tell the films we make, and I've made 11 Attenboroughs and lots of other films, but actually people who can understand that immersive world, how to use it, how to translate things to people. And I think we'll be in a very, very different place, Geffen.
Brilliant, thank you. Which neatly, Russell, brings me to you, really. If I look at the challenges ahead, and I talk to a lot of teachers, I look at the challenges ahead and technology and all the expectations that are laid out. What do we need to do from your position as Chief Executive of Teach First? What do we need to do in terms of developing teachers? Because this isn't just going to happen, is it? It will require investment, thought, and many more things. So what is it we will be looking at? What is it you'll be looking at?
Okay, so 3 things I think are particularly important on this one. First of all, we shouldn't leave it all to teachers. That's the other important thing, and I think you've made that point to a degree. It's a lot to expect teachers to be scanning the labour market 10, 20 years ahead and getting it right. So one of the things we need to do is to make sure our schools are very open places where other organisations can get involved and to share their understanding of what work will look like, the kind of work that Kidzania does, amongst other things. So I think that's important. Number 2, I think one of the things we really need to be focusing in on is primary education. Too often, when it comes to informing children about what the future will look like and what careers will look like, we think of that as a secondary activity, even into the latter half of secondary school. And as we know, stereotypes are reinforced by that point in time. So we need to be equipping primary teachers to be able to do this. And then my third point, I think, is a note of caution on this one as well. If the future is getting more uncertain, and if change is accelerating, one of the things that we may risk doing is turning our schools into a kind of arms race to try and keep up with this. Let's change careers education ever faster. Let's cover ever more bases as well, because we can't predict what will happen. And that's a recipe for burnout and for schools to become frenetic environments. And I don't think that's very good for learning as well. So one of the things I want to think about in terms of preparing teachers and in terms of pedagogy is, what are the classics here? What are the things that have endured and we will expect to endure in the future that are common ground? So I don't think, for example, that literacy is going to go out of fashion in a digital era. I don't think numeracy is going to become unimportant. I think history will remain important as well. So I would be encouraging us not to try and race to catch up, but to try and slow down a bit and think about what the classics are that will equip people flexibly as well.
I agree entirely, and I think there's also something that concerns me, and that you get as feedback from teachers, and inevitably you end up talking about things like DFE and Ofsted and government in this, and things that hold us back. So we're talking about all these things, but and all that stuff out there and everything that's possible. But at the same time, we're still having a debate whether we should use mobile phones in classrooms. So there is that kind of, it feels to me that the gap between the thinking and what is happening and what is permissible is getting bigger on that front. And I think that's a real concern, and we've got to make sure that teachers don't bear the brunt of that. And in a sense, the thing that made me a little bit happy about our research was that when the stereotypes were set at the age of 4, and we suspect lower, my instant reaction was, as was my wife's incidentally, who was a head teacher, the instant reaction was, well, at least they can't blame the schools this time. And I think that we need to be aware of reality gaps in this, I think, and what we can do practically. And I agree. So I think my 14-year-old daughter should be paid money to teach 6-year-old children technology, because I think she's probably better at it than most of us, for example. Anna, the media is an interesting one, isn't it? And as editor-in-chief of The Week Junior, soon International The Week Junior, what role, positively, do you think, as a children's paper magazine, can you actively play?
I think we have a really, a very big responsibility actually, and a duty to readers, especially young readers of our magazine in particular, to show them what they could be. I think what you said before about if a child doesn't see something, they don't even know they can be it. So my job and my team's job with our magazine is to always think really carefully about the type of people we profile in the magazine, the sort of stories that we tell, to avoid stereotyping people by gender, by race, by sexual orientation. That people are people, and anybody should have the opportunity to do anything, or at least they shouldn't be defined by their place of birth or their place in the social structure. And with the work we did with you on Becoming Me, the whole intention of that really was to show children that there are so many different people that they could be, and that the journey to becoming who you will be as an adult doesn't have to take a straight course, and it doesn't have to be predetermined. And also, I think one of the things that I particularly like about this work we've done is that we are focusing on the whole person and the who you would like to be as much as what you would like to be, and that who you are shouldn't predetermine what you will become, and that what you will become isn't always as important as who you will become, because, you know, people have different journeys to success. And I think we've demonstrated quite well within the magazine that you can come into this country as a refugee, like Dame Stephanie Casey did, and set up a computer business, one of the earliest computer entrepreneurs for women, and to go on to build a business empire off the back of that. And we've profiled all sorts of other people. There are sort of adventurers, engineers, Olympians, but none of these people have had a straightforward journey. And I think for people, I have children myself, I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. And I think for them to see that their lives can take whichever shape they would like them to, if only they can focus and put some work in, and there shouldn't be barriers. And also that there shouldn't be preconceptions. One of the things I'm very careful about in the magazine is to not suggest that it might be a struggle, for example, for certain people to get into certain professions. I think the moment you set up a barrier, a perceived barrier, then you put people off. So my intention is always just to show this is what you could be. Now go and do it.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. He's amazing, right? He's just absolutely amazing. I wish I was you. So are you 11 now?
Yeah.
Yeah, 11, and an entrepreneur. Big word, big man. Tell us first of all what you do. What are you an entrepreneur in? Explain.
Hi, my name is Omari McQueen. I'm the youngest award-winning vegan chef in the UK and the youngest restaurateur in the world. I'm also the creator of my own company called Dipalicious, where I sell vegan snacks, meals, juices, and the most amazing dips in the world.
Easy. What gave you, where does it come from? What gave you the idea?
It happened when I went to Kidzania, and at Kidzania it taught me how to work for people and get your own jobs. But I didn't want any of those jobs, so I decided to start my own business and make money doing what I love. And that's how it happened.
I swear to God, I didn't know that bit, right? But I'm very happy about it. I absolutely didn't know that bit. So what's next?
Well, I have achieved some goals, and and I'm working on more goals. I'm trying to bring more people together through food, and I just signed a thing for my book. I forgot what it was called. Yeah.
It's amazing. So if I asked you a question, what things do you think, it's hard to kind of ask, what things do you think that you've done and learned that you would like to tell other 11-year-olds about? Why, i.e., why you and why not all the other 11-year-olds? What is it? What makes you special?
I'm not special, but I'm special to my mum and dad. And the thing that I learned is to stay humble, be yourself, and your flaws make you unique. And you should try, and never give up.
Wow. And actually it brings me to the question to all three of you, really. I've got two questions. I'll ask the first one. 2030 is always thrown as the big year by OECD, Education 2030, the future we want. Russell, what will the classroom look like? What will the school look like in 2030, in 10 years' time? What will have changed?
Well, a starting point is to look at what the differences have been in classrooms 10 years ago today, and there hasn't been very much difference, I would suggest. You would recognize a classroom from 10 years ago. You'd probably recognize a classroom from 50 years ago as well. So one of the safest ways of predicting the future is to assume it will be exactly like the past. So we might be preparing people for exactly the same thing. But at some point, that safety runs out. And there's a tipping point in there. And I think the best thing to do is to admit that I have no idea what the classroom will look like in 2030. And therefore, what we need to do is to prepare the teachers and leaders of our schools to be adaptable and flexible. I think that government policy, in particular, will be a major driver of their behaviours. So we should be looking at what the strategies of the political parties are and what they're going to do for that. And if at all they could maybe back off some of the rapid change of policy, they could let schools invent some of their own plans and their own directions. And what would be nice to see would be a more diverse set of classrooms as well, and a diverse set of schools where people are trialling out lots of different ideas, and the best will flourish within there.
Perfect. Thank you. Anna, what for you? Because I think one of the issues with teaching and schools is, and sometimes it's a downside, everybody's been to school, and therefore everybody has an opinion, rightly or wrongly, right? As a child. From your perspective, what do you think 2030 will look like?
I think we should ask the kids today what they'd like that classroom to look like. I agree with you. I don't think classrooms have changed very much in 10 years. My children have been in school for the last 10 years, and I haven't seen a great deal of change. But I agree also that what we need to be teaching children within schools is about agility. It is about being able to make decisions for yourself, independence. Critical thinking is a core skill. So for me, it's not so much about what the classroom looks like. It's about encouraging debate within the classroom.
Anthony.
Well, I think classrooms are going to change quite radically. I think. I'll give you an example. We're working on it's different, but you'll get the example. In Norway, we're building the new museum where there's nothing in the museum. It's completely blank. Why is it completely blank? Because we're building things like whales that will come in, and there can be up to 100 people in the room, and they can interact with the whale in a blank space. So I think what's exciting about the classrooms of the future is there'll be places you step into and do things and interact. Obviously there'll be desks, but there won't be desks in the middle because they'll be messing up the space we can work with. So I think they'll be around the edge. And I think that, we've done tests on the brain. Once you're in these interactive, and it's not the only way to teach, I'm not saying that for 1 second, but once you're in these interactive processes, the brain comes alive, and because you individually are interacting, and we can see how you're interacting afterwards. We've done experiments in places, the poorest schools in the world in Ecuador, where kids of classes of 40, and the teachers can see by getting AI data back from how the kids are doing, how their language skills are doing. So I think we'll see a very different classroom. I don't necessarily think it's a space-age classroom, but a classroom in which you don't sit behind a desk, you get up, and you're not just preached to by a teacher, which you should be as well, but you interact, touch, and communicate. And that, I think, is going to change the next generation radically.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you that question slightly differently. You're 11 now. In 10 years' time, you'll be 21.
Yeah.
Right? What do you think you'll be doing when you're 21?
Have my own restaurant, and I will bring more people together through food without harming animals.
And I'll come and eat at your place. Absolutely, no doubt about that. Brilliant. I'm just looking at the guys there. It would be good if we could take some questions from the audience, but we'd need a running mic. Can we get that organized? Hello? Seemingly not. Are there any questions before we get the mic? Yeah, cool. Let's just do this really practically. You just hang on to that. We'll just improvise a bit, shall we? We can do that really easy. There's a question over there. So we'll just... Have we got a mic?
No.
Genius. This was not planned, so thank you very much for that.
Hear anything, I can't.
Hi.
It's frustrating.
I am guessing at the question. What? I am guessing at the question.
I know.
I can't hear the question.
Does that work?
As long as we're all in the same boat.
It's not good. Yeah.
How you feeling?
Leon?
Thank you very much. Thanks for your analysis of what is wrong with our schools. When can we get an education minister that has nothing to do with politics? Because one of the real challenge is that each time we have a new education minister, he seems to know more than the previous one, even if they are members of the same political party. I think this political distraction is a real distraction. It's doing far more damage than probably we are imagining.
I would thank you for that. I don't think there's an easy answer. I'm going to look at Russell now. I don't think there's an easy answer.
If you go back, I'll take
William,
this from you.
what a genius you are. Thank you very much. I don't think there's an easy answer to that because politics are politics. And I think it will always exist, right? And it does seem to be the case that more than any other profession that I can think of. So my next door neighbor is a doctor. Just because I live next door to a doctor, please don't put me in charge of the NHS. Yeah, but it does seem to be that if you're a politician and your spouse is a teacher, that gives you some sort of credibility to speak about it. I think we need to do these things. I'm sorry to perhaps disappoint you on that, despite the politicians. I think we need to gather the evidence, we need to keep making the case, and I think we need to do the thing that perhaps that we don't do often enough. You can have, with the Department for Education, with Ofsted, with ministers, you can have education discussions that don't mention the word child once. Because it's about policy, and it's about money, and it's about how bad or good our teachers are, this, that, and the other. But nobody talks about the 11-year-old who will become a 21-year-old. And I think we just need to keep doing that. And if we collect the evidence that what we do makes the difference, I'm sure we will get there. But I have personally, I nail my colours to the mast, I have not much faith in politicians. Do you want to? Any of you? Yeah.
I mean, I totally understand the desire to take politics out of education because it's often exercised in very negative ways. But actually, if we step back a bit, I don't want education to be fully apolitical. I want it to be within the control of our democratic processes. There is no other set of decisions more important to our nation and all of the nations in the world as to what the shape of our education system looks like. Although I've represented the profession in the past in many ways, I wouldn't want the profession by itself to be making choices about the future. I would want it to be part of a wider dialogue that involves young people, that involves employers, and our political process is the means by which we reconcile all of those different interests. So what I would be asking for is not how can we get politics out of education, but how can we make the relationship between education and politics a productive one? How can we, for example, align the timescales much better? It seems to me that politics is very short-term decision-making that looks for tangible gains before the next election. That doesn't suit the 5 to 10 year improvement path that a school needs as well. So can we slow that pace down a bit? Can we improve the dialogue? And can we not have this fight where politicians score points by being seen to put the education system down, which then makes it really hard for us to recruit teachers and other staff to be part of it? And can, of course, the education system itself stand up and speak for what it wants in a constructive fashion and try to persuade the rest of the country why they should follow the views of teachers rather than, say, politicians?
I'd agree with that. Anybody before we take another question, if there is one? No? Is there another question?
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for giving your time. It's been brilliant hearing the insight that you've given. In terms of looking at the future, and in particular, Omari, I'm thinking about you and the role that you use technology for. How essential is it that we actually empower student voice and empower young people's voice when we look at social mobility?
I'll start on that one. Thanks, Henry. I think it's incredibly important, but we've got to stop doing that in a tokenistic way. My son, when he was 10 years old, the one who's just finished at Oxford, when he was 10 years old, he was on the school council. And he came home one day and he said, I've written to the head teacher, I've resigned from the school council. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I wonder what he's written. And actually what he'd written was quite right. He said, we have meetings every year whereby you ask us what we want. And every year we give you the list. And every year you tell us for health and safety reasons that we can't have it. So I think it's about, we're either serious, and the same with parents, incidentally, and communities. We either do it seriously or let's not bother. But what we have to come to terms with politically and as schools is that when we hear things that we don't necessarily like, we still have to listen and we still have to take them on board. That'd be my view of it.
Well, I think that's getting children to speak up is one thing, and making sure they feel listened to is something else again. I think there's a lot of work to be done around not just empowering children to speak up and voice what they think about things, but also as adults to model good behaviour in terms of listening to other opinions, engaging in debate, making sure that our children realise that stories are rarely simple, that there are often many sides to an argument, not just two even. So I think there's a lot of work to be done just in talking, encouraging dialogue, listening, and then I think from that you will encourage children to share how they feel about things, to feel as though they can be a force for change in a positive way. I think there's nothing worse than asking a child to speak up about something they care about only to do nothing about it. I think that sort of goes back to what you were saying about sometimes a fairly tokenistic approach to this sort of thing. So, I mean, again, you know, we're a children's magazine, we're not teachers, but very much at the core of The Week Junior is the idea that debate is important and it should be encouraged, and that opinions matter, and that children's opinions matter too.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think there's some at the back. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, Russell, what do you think about technology in schools when it comes to children with special needs? Because from what Anthony was saying, I have children with special educational needs, and I feel that the technology, what you're speaking about, could help them a lot in school. And especially with Omari, is my son. I homeschooled him for 3 years. So he has dyslexia. He learned how to read and write via using technology. Now he's in secondary school, those technologies aren't available to him. So when do you feel that that will be embedded in school, where they realise how important technology is for children with learning difficulties?
I absolutely agree, actually, that the potential of technology in the special needs domain is huge, actually, and we're already seeing some of that being deployed as well. And I think that will be the leading edge of how technology makes its way across the whole education system. In mainstream education, interestingly, and disappointingly, I think, often technology is just used to replace an activity that already existed. You know, the way we see interactive whiteboards being used often is not that dissimilar from the way a non-interactive whiteboard would be used. So we're not really getting real gains in the system. We're getting marginal gains there. But when I've seen already teachers using technology to work with children with learning difficulties and other special needs, I can see new things happening there. So I actually think that will be the leading edge of technology. And I think what we really need, therefore, is perhaps to make sure that schools are focusing in on the teachers who are teaching special needs pupils and the special schools as well, and looking at what they do, and use that as our vanguard, if you like, for getting technology used elsewhere. I'm very optimistic about the potential there.
I think you talk about how can it help. Well, we're in medical trials with Atlantic Productions, who I run, with Harvard Medical School, using basically virtual reality, tracking one's face and eyes and everything else. And we've used it on autistic kids. And we've managed to build a sort of picture of what are the things how it could possibly be treated. And one of the things we know about autism is that people can't look at faces, for example. So what the virtual reality, when you try and get people to look at the human faces, they won't do it. But what we've done is developed a system of a kind of robotic face which kids are now looking at and learning to start to overcome elements. And I'm very excited by that, because that system, when it's in place, doesn't have to be expensive. But that could be translated to depression, which is the next area, and mental disorders and other things. And I think, we need to get this out across the education system so that people can use it across the world, and everybody should have access to that. Of course, it's going to upset the pharmaceutical companies because they think everything should be treated with pills, which is rubbish.
Perfect. I think we've got time perhaps for one more quick one. Can we do that?
Hello there. Oh, did you hear me? Thank you for what I think is probably the most important 45 minutes of the whole event, actually. And it's just a shame there aren't so many more people in here, which is probably indicative of maybe so much. I'm a primary head teacher, by the way. I think the agenda of social mobility probably gets a bad name. It's another thing to some schools, perhaps. I suppose I've got one comment and perhaps one concern, if you like. The comment is that as a head teacher, this is not difficult. If you go back to what our purpose is and really value, then what you're discussing, what I encourage in the school and give the teachers license to do, is not difficult. And by using primary futures, which I'm sure many people here know, an excellent way in which we can start to engage in the world of work. I guess one of my concerns as a head teacher is, and there's clearly a positive move from central government. I'm doing some work with the Careers and Enterprise Company on developing some work for schools, but my worry is there will be essentially a lunchbox, if you like, a kit that's delivered to primary schools, and I can see it now. It will be another thing, another tick, if you like, from Ofsted. And as much as I see value in it, I worry that some schools won't see value in it, and it will just be another thing. And I think, Russell, you alluded to that earlier. So it's not a question, it's just maybe an observation.
Thank you. I think very quickly, I think two things. One is, let's hope that happens. Let's hope that we can lead by example and have evidence that it does make a difference. And in terms of the lunchbox, let's take the lunchbox, but we can put our own sandwiches in, can't we? And I think we'll just do that. So our time is up. Thanks for listening. I've got one more thing that I need to do. Omari, what's your website?
Dipalicious.co.uk.
Good. Amazing. You're now tasked, every single one of you would go on that website and have a look. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks to you.
Well done, Joe.
So, just so we got that loud and clear, dipalicious.co.uk, is that right?
Yeah.
Bookmark it on your phones, dipalicious.co.uk. Really interesting last question from this head teacher, though. Next year, we want to see this session packed. So tweet about it. You've got a panel here, Russell and Gare, I know your Twitter accounts. They have lots of followers too. They'll retweet. Let's get tweeting about this session. Say how fascinating it was. You'll retweet it, won't you? All of you. Exactly. Brilliant. And then we can pack it out next year. Thank you very much. We'll be back in about 10 minutes for the next session, which is from Little Heath School. And it's all about using technology, video conferencing.
Is that it?
To help basically bring a global dimension to special educational needs. See you at 1:30. Thank you.